Hi. Coming up next on the Union Label will be a conversation with Gary Seay, Business Manager of International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 816, and Dr. Dave Kreuger, retired history professor at the college. Please join us. Welcome to the program. Governor Ernie Fletcher says that Kentucky needs a right-to-work law and Kentucky needs to repeal the prevailing wage law on public construction projects. The governor says a right-to-work law will provide what he calls employee choice and bring in lots and lots of good jobs. He says on the topic of prevailing wage, it will save the taxpayers tons and tons of money. Your reaction to the governor's statements?
First, as far as right to work, gives no guarantee to anyone. Right to work honestly drives down wages. It requires the unions to use union dues money to represent those that choose not to belong to the union. There has been no study that I've seen that shows that it actually will enhance jobs in the marketplace. In fact, a recent study by LSU, I think it was done in 2005, showed that right to work, after 1,000 companies outside of Louisiana was surveyed, put right to work 24th as far as where it showed up in regard to other issues. Many other items in that report was much more important. Labor productivity, availability of skilled labor, normally done through organized labor, and even corruption in the state was 55%, where right to work was 35%.
Now, to explain to the audience how a right-to-work law operates. Number one, unions are voted into a workplace in a free and fair democratic election. And of course, a union can be voted out just as well. Under a right-to-work law, you can enjoy Union 1 wages, Union 1 benefits without joining the union or paying a service fee, correct?
Yes.
And if you and the boss have a dispute, the union has to represent you.
You talking about
Yeah,
if
under
I
right to
choose
work.
to not belong
Right,
to the
right,
union?
right.
Yes, the union has a legal responsibility to process that grievance, same as if the individual
So
was
it becomes a
member.
basic fairness issue.
Yes, sir.
Now, Dr. Kreuger, give us the historical background. Who pushed right to work? How did this all get started?
What we call right to work, in fact, I think the term itself came into being in 1947. Need a little bit of background to that. I teach history, so we go way back to 1 AD on this. No, we don't. In 1935, the Wagner Act, also known as the National Labor Relations Act, was passed. Probably the most important piece of labor legislation of the 20th century. That law gave workers the right to collective bargaining, the right to organize, and the right to hold elections, required companies to recognize unions. And what essentially happened under the Wagner Act is that the so-called union shop was established. This meant that if you were hired by a company that had a unionized workforce, then you had to join the union. Opposition to the Wagner Act was strong among businessmen, conservatives, and that includes Republicans, but surprisingly it also included Southern Democrats.
Now, one of their reasons for opposing unions, was it not because it would make blacks and whites equal?
In the 1930s and 1940s, not necessarily so. In fact, you will still find blacks today who level the accusation that unions hurt black laborers because unions tended to be, especially craft unions, tended to be lily white, and there's much truth to that. Southern opposition to unionization deals with a Southern strategy that emerged in the 1800s to attract industry. And because the South did not have the capital to start industry itself, the theory was if you established a pro-business climate, as it was called, this would bring in northern industry. A pro-business climate meant keep wages low, keep taxes low, and by keeping taxes low, this also meant keep government services such as education, health, and the like at minimal levels. And that approach to industrialization still remains very powerful in southern states and also in western states. Quite frankly, agricultural states have supported right-to-work laws. We haven't gotten there yet in terms of the history. In 1947, when there was a backlash against the New Deal, the Taft-Hartley Act was passed. That law, among other things, allowed states to establish right-to-work laws. A right-to-work law essentially says that employees have the right to either belong or not belong to a union in a company where the workforce has agreed to unionize. And the theory is that this is fairness. But it's fairness in the sense of saying that in a democracy, the majority votes to establish a particular law. The minority we expect to go along. Well, in a right-to-work state, we're saying to the minority of workers, you don't have to go along. And the whole point of it was to weaken unions, and in theory, this would hold down labor costs and attract business.
Well, Gary, wouldn't that be like living in the city of Paducah and just deciding I'm not going to pay my taxes, but I expect police protection, fire protection, garbage pickup, and all city services? Isn't that basically it?
I see no difference in it, Barry, or maybe even to the point that as a barber, he has to pay to maintain his barber's license. It's not like that he can still maintain barbering because he chooses not to reissue his license with the state. That's true with electricians, true with plumbers. The state mandates that if you're going to do plumbing and electrical work, that you must be a licensed electrician and pay a fee to maintain such.
But I think there's a great allure for right-to-work laws in southern and western states that are agrarian and tend to have basically what you might call a fundamentalist evangelical approach to religion, which stresses which exalts the individual over the community. Union representation, in a sense, is organizing a community of workers. And people don't understand that management organizes into various organizations. And there is this belief that the individual can succeed on his or her own efforts. You will oftentimes hear right-to-work advocates say this gives the individual the choice to bargain individually with management.
Now,
Which, of course,
how successful
historically that
been?
has never worked. An individual on a plant floor does not have the power or even the access to a high-level management to negotiate his or her own fringe benefits or wages, for that matter. But I think there is much attraction to that in many of these very rural states.
Now, Gary, you had some statistics talking about where the governor says these bring in good, high-paying jobs, and what compare and contrast right-to-work and non-right-to-work states in terms of income.
Well, statistics that I've read from the Federal Department of Labor shows that in right-to-work states, the average wage earner earns $5,000 less than the same worker in a non-right-to-work state. And I think that study is from 2003.
Kentucky has had a good deal of success in attracting business and industry. Unfortunately, not as much in western Kentucky. There's a part of Kentucky that is known as the Golden Triangle. The Golden Triangle stretches from northern Kentucky, that's basically across the river from Cincinnati, Greater Cincinnati, Newport, Covington region. Draw a line down the Ohio River to Louisville, draw another line down to Lexington, and then complete the triangle by drawing the line back up to northern Kentucky. That area has been enormously successful in attracting business. It's the rest of the state for the most part, that has not had much success. And that's not much different from other southern states, where you get these great pockets of what appear to be economic success. I suppose in Tennessee you would say Memphis and Nashville, but the rest of the state remains very rural. And in these rural small city areas, you get this great emphasis on traditional means of attracting industry. Keep taxes low, keep wages low, and they will come. That hasn't worked for a century.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Barry, I think that we need to bring emphasis to a recent release from the governor's office. Governor Fletcher is talking about how we can't attract any business, that 50% of the clients opt out of Kentucky due to us not being a right to work. But in Governor Fletcher's midterm report that he published and gave to all the legislators, and where I wouldn't misquote anything, growing jobs in Kentucky, economic development. And this is during his tenure. More than 60,000 new jobs created since January 2004. More than $4 billion in new and expanded manufacturing investments. Nearly 26,000 new jobs in new and expanded manufacturing. More Kentuckians employed during 2005 than any other time in Kentucky's history. And it goes farther to say, with a quotation, Kentucky open for business. Ranked 4th in site selection. Competitiveness Award, ranked 12th of U.S. states for new and expanded facilities. 5 Kentucky metropolitan areas ranked in the top 100 business climates. 8 Kentucky communities ranked in the top 100 micropolitan areas for corporate expansion. I think what Governor Fletcher is saying and what he's produced are basically 180 degrees
I was
out
going
of
to say,
phase.
that does exactly buttress his argument.
Yeah, but I think there's something else to be said. When you talk about economic development, there are intractable cultural and social issues in an area that need to be dealt with. So when you talk about it, you've got to act. You got to do something. And so you come to that with a philosophy that taxes are bad, unions are bad. So there are 2 areas you can act because you can pass laws, which are simple to do. Mm-hmm. You can lower taxes, which is popular, and you can make an effort for right to work laws. That's something you can do. But the more difficult issues, dealing with the ruralness of an area when you've got urban and suburban managers making decisions, that's tough to deal with. Mm-hmm. So you focus on those surface things that you can act on and that have been popular in your constituency, in this case people promoting economic development, in your constituency for over a century. They work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Talking about where right to work laws, 11, all the old Confederate states, all 11 are right to work states. And then the other states are, of course, more or less.
Yeah, there's 22 right to work states.
22 and half are in the old Confederacy.
And the remainder are Great Plains, Western states.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's look at the politics of this. I have been told by my political sources that there is a large block of Republicans in the Kentucky House. I've heard numbers from 10 to 17 who will oppose the governor on right to work and prevailing wage. I know of a handful in the Senate, Republicans. Politically, any feeling as to why Fletcher did this? Because to begin with, right to work laws in Kentucky have been introduced for years. They've never gone anywhere. Why did this guy make such a push on this? Did he not count numbers and know that many members of his own party wouldn't support him on this?
Barry, I could only give an opinion and nothing to support my opinion either, other than what I read. That Governor Fletcher's ratings is, I think, 48th, 49th.
He's actually 49th from what I read too. He and Arnold Schwarzenegger are tied for 49th, and Governor Taft of Ohio is 50th.
Within a year, he's going to be gearing up for a re-election campaign, and he's going to need money. I believe that the legislation was introduced to assist him in raising money from big business. But again, that's an opinion.
And of course, Dave, again, you're a student of politics too. Here's a governor putting the prestige of the office on the line on these two issues that he's going to lose on.
60 days from now, what Governor Fletcher said will be forgotten. We seem to think that the public has a long memory. It does not. And as Gary said, this could well be, something you say to play to your financial base. And they will remember it because it's important to them. But to many other people, it's unimportant, and it will be forgotten.
But again, from a historical point of view, most governors, like most other elected officials, are looking to history. And so if you look at the success, how successful were you in getting your program put forth? Well, here this man has made these two issues very important to his administration. He's more than likely going to lose on both of them. Is he not looking to the future, or?
I again have to go back to what I just said. He may have said this fully expecting that that kind of legislation will not pass in the General Assembly. Mm-hmm. And so you say things to appeal to your base. It's like a president of the United States beating the drum for war or being aggressive in the world, speaking to the American public. He's not speaking to people overseas. So you look at the people you want to appeal to or whose support you need, you speak to them.
Mm-hmm. In the time we have left, let's talk about prevailing wage. Explain what that is. Fletcher's, it's a two-pronged program, as you know, right to work and prevailing wage. Explain that.
Well, before I do that, I would like to mention one other
sure.
item that
Sure.
appeared in the Paducah Sun last Friday, and that was an expansion at Arkema, and that's about a $40 million expansion.
Now, Arkema is a
chemical plant at Calvert City, Kentucky.
Okay.
And it quotes Walter Kramer, Community Relations Manager of the Philadelphia-based firm. The plant has demonstrated that it makes quality products over the years, Kramer said, and frankly, the business climate in Kentucky is quite friendly. It's a very good place for us to situate this important project.
And that's a union plant.
That's a union plant. But that's a recent article.
Interesting.
Prevailing wage, there's legislation in Kentucky, and this applies basically to government construction projects for the most part. And the law states that in a government-funded construction project, you must pay the prevailing wage of the area in which the project is situated. In other words, the prevailing wage, or the average wage, including fringe benefits, that is paid for electricians, carpenters, masons, and the like that are involved. And those are the wages that must be paid. You also take into account union wages in those professions as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, prevailing wage is the prevailing wage that's established for a particular area. And we have basically annual surveys that we have to complete. As far as my local union, it's a public format that any and every employer has the right to submit evidence to the Department of Labor for them to make such a wage determination. And then that's normally good for until the next prevailing wage hearing.
Mm-hmm. So how do you answer Fletcher's contention that the government will save a lot of money by doing away with the prevailing wage?
Well, I guess I'd have to go back and refer to Peter Phillips' study that was recently done on Kentucky.
And he's a professor
of economics at the University of Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And he came in and took the governor's proposal and reviewed Kentucky and Ohio. And it fell into a real good format, and I think Michigan may have even fell into it,
mm-hmm.
where there was a time when Kentucky, we did not have a prevailing wage. I think we regained that in 1994, 95?
Don't know.
Anyway, the study was done with schools in Ohio with prevailing wage, Kentucky without prevailing wage. Then it was done with Kentucky in the prevailing wage status. And the study itself, and I didn't bring a copy with me, actually showed minimal difference as far as cost per square footage. And when I say minimum, a dollar and a half was the difference, Barry.
And another thing, another argument I know unions have made is you get what you pay for. It's quality. Now, I remember two studies done back in the 1980s, I believe, by Harvard and and North Carolina State, which proved that across the board, union workers are more productive than non-union workers. And your union, of course, you have a very rigorous apprenticeship program, and you just can't come off the street and be an electrician.
Well, I think that the expertise that you learn, number one, improves productivity, which should even enhance the cost factor of doing business. Because as a skilled, productive worker increases productivity, at that point there is a possibility that costs can actually lower by using skilled labor.
Right, right.
But you know, a lot of this goes back to control. Managers, CEOs of businesses don't like losing control. And union shops, prevailing wage laws are threats to their control, even if the economic savings are minimal or non-existent. And so, although all of this is discussed in the guise of saving the Kentucky taxpayers money, making Kentucky friendlier to business, the truth of the matter is these attitudes have been around for an awfully long time, and I think they have more to do with who is in control. And it doesn't matter if it's John D. Rockefeller in 1890, or the head of General Motors in 1937, or Henry Ford in 1935, or CEOs today. There is this fear of losing control.
So basically, they just want to get rid of unions.
I think it could be the perception that actually exists. Tell me this. How would you save money if, by eliminating prevailing wage, if a union contractor got the same job, we'd be paying union wages on that particular project? That has never been discussed by any proponent of eliminating prevailing wage, to my knowledge. Also, has there ever been any monitoring on what the employer might receive? Would he actually enhance his profit rather than the employees losing their wages?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And again, it's the quality factor. If you bring in people who are not as skilled, and I know there are instances of where buildings have been built non-union and they had to bring in union contractors to finish the job or repair the poor work to start with. We were talking earlier today. You said that Governor Fletcher, when he was in Congress, supported a national right-to-work law.
That's correct. I think I don't know if every year or every term he would introduce this legislation, and of course it would be sent to committee where it would be buried.
It would die.
And it didn't matter if it was the Democratic or Republican majority in Congress.
You had some more statistics, I believe.
I just want to mention one other thing
from
this was a release yesterday from Secretary of Labor Elaine Chao, where she is pushing a WARD initiative, and that stands for Workforce Innovation and Regional Economic Development. Statement, quote, 90% of the jobs in the fastest growing sectors of our economy require post-secondary training and education. There was $195 million granted for areas to assist in maybe promoting higher education or training, which I'd like to say that we're talking about organized labor and our apprenticeship programs. But Kentucky, out of the 13 regions that was awarded this $15 million each, Kentucky did not have any running in that. So again, I think we should have been putting more efforts in trying to get part of this money initiative as much as what we're putting into trying to get a right to work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
There's also the matter of perception. This is a perception of a state of rednecks and backwardness. That's not generally true across the board, but you do have this perception, which is we have a sick workforce. We have a sick population when you look at health trends. So you're going to come in here and you're going to pay health insurance. You're going to have workers who are going to be more time off from work. They're ill. They're sick. The state still has a problem with perception of its educational system. And the challenge is how do you deal with that? How do you produce communities whose physical appearance, in terms of parks, in terms of sanitation and all of that, are going to be attractive to people who make the decisions about locating here? How do you give the perception that this is a state that is relatively safe and crime-free when you're determined to arm more of the populace? There are these kinds of issues. And the trouble with those kinds of issues is they can't deal with them by passing a law to reduce the state income tax by 0.5%, or to lower the sales tax, or to pass a law to reduce the impact of unions, and the impact of unions is shrinking in this state as it is nationally. So there are some real challenges, but I don't think they lie in the areas where the governor has suggested they lie.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts? We're rapidly running out.
One thought would be, Barry, that if we were to become a right to work and we fell into the same format as what I think 14 out of 15 states have, that the wages would lower, we're going to see an immediate reduction in our tax revenues also. I think that's got to be taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm. And of course, among the poorest states in the country, they are right-to-work states. States like Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi, places like that.
Yeah, and your worksite injuries are higher in right-to-work. And just recently, the coal mine accident in West Virginia, mm-hmm. non-union plant. Mm-hmm. The unions have probably accomplished so much in legislation that the average citizen really doesn't realize. You know, pension, protecting our pension benefits. ERISA was legislation that was supported and maybe even introduced by organized labor, mm-hmm. to protect pension benefits, where we wouldn't see after working a career that our benefits are gone by the wayside, such as the employees of Enron lost. Mm-hmm. You know, at one time, you could work for 20 years and you still did not have a vested pension. ERISA came in initially back in 1972 and put a 20-year max on it, vesting of pensions, reduced to, I think it was about 5 years later, reduced that 20 years to 10, and now you can vest out in pension under ERISA rules and regulation in 5 years.
We are out of time. Thank you all for joining us. My guests today were Dave Kreuger and Gary Seay. I'm Barry Craig. Please join us next time. Thanks.